while you continue to get settled, many of you are familiar. I'm really glad you came out tonight. And there's also many more unfamiliar faces who I'm really eager to see here. My name is Jason Mark. I'm the editor of this quarterly publication, Earth Island Journal. And just want to thank you all for coming out. And I really want to thank John Lum and Michael Light. This is John's space here. Michael, his partner, tells me that they're used to throwing events and parties and get-togethers here, and you can see why, because it's a really fantastic space. So thank you guys so much. And we'll jump into it. I think most people here should already be pretty familiar with the CVs of Rebecca Solnit and Annie Leonard. If you're not, you might be at the wrong party. And I'm glad you're here. You can stay. Thank you so much for that. But just as a reminder, in case you didn't check out all of the information, Rebecca Solnit is a San Francisco, I think it's fair to say, San Francisco literary luminary, and she's the author of 13 books. 15 books? Oh my God, who's counting? Yeah. She's the author of 15 books. Savage Dreams was her first book, which I just reread not too long ago. It's really fantastic. River of Shadows about Edwin Muybridge. Did I say that right? Edward Muybridge. Wanderlust, which is my favorite book of hers, which is all about the importance of walking and getting out of your car and off your bicycle and walking around and seeing the world, and the importance of the things you see when you just walk around. Hope in the Dark, and many other ones that I'm forgetting, including the title of your most recent book, which is called
The Faraway Nearby.
The Faraway Nearby. Buy it right now. Don't go on to Amazon. Go to pals.com or your local independent bookstore. Support them and get The Faraway Nearby, which is a really excellent book that is launches with the story about apricots. And so we'll talk more about storytelling later. And then Annie Leonard, who you've probably seen her online. This is the face that launched 1 million viral videos. And Annie is the creative force and impresario behind the Story of Stuff, which is a series of online videos and really pithy, small, really short, digestible little online stories about, well, first of all, about Stuff. That was the one gangbuster. And then the story of Bottled Water, the story of Citizens United, the story of how we make change together, that together have been viewed more than 40 million times by people around the world. And so we're here to talk with them and to have a conversation about how we can create stories and narratives that will create progressive social change. And social change, I think many of us here want to see for a more socially just and ecologically sustainable world. And that, of course, is what Earth Island Journal is all about, what Earth Island Journal has been doing for more than 30 years, that kind of storytelling through social change, which is obviously a really huge topic. So I want to start with an easy question, or what I hope is an easy question for you guys, and just have you guys share what are some of the stories you've seen recently, and define recently however you like, some stories you've seen recently that you thought were really powerful, and that you shared with others, whether you shared them, orally or you shared them, whatever, socially,
like diseases.
Yeah, like diseases. So I don't know. What were some of your stories your favorite stories recently, and why were they your favorites?
Here's my least favorite.
Sure, that works too.
Unfortunately,
Hacking the question.
lots of powerful stories are not on our side. And there was one recently that I saw that just stunned me. Did any of you guys see that Super Bowl ad for the Cadillac?
Yeah.
I mean,
With Bob Dylan?
No, that was Chrysler, I think.
Oh, okay.
In the Super Bowl ad, go on Google Super Bowl ad Cadillac. It is the grossest clear articulation of the dominant story in America about stuff. And without ever saying what the story is, but there's a rich guy who walks through his fancy house and has his fancy car and all this, and he is making fun of Europeans for taking vacation. And he says, why don't we take vacation? Because we're hard workers, and he's articulating the whole American dream.
Wow.
And he says, they take all of August off. And he goes, off. Like this, he reiterates that. And then you see him walk through this, the American dream, as we're told, as the dominant story is. And so he says the reason we work so hard is because we are better people. We're not slackers. We aim high. And then he gets in his Cadillac and he says, and all this stuff, that's just an extra perk. It's interesting that it's a hybrid Cadillac, but he's like, all this stuff, that's just an extra perk for working hard, for only taking 2 weeks off in August, he says. But I just thought this was such a fascinating story because it was such a clear articulation of this dominant story that we're supposed to all buy, and it's so gross. So go home and look at it if you haven't.
You know, I could sort of build on that by talking about watching a story fall apart over the last year, a really bad story. And I grew up in the Bay Area. Silicon Valley was supposed to be full of magic wonder boys doing gee whiz amazing things that were going to make life totally awesome. And it's been really interesting. The world's turned on Silicon Valley, starting with San Francisco in the last year, and really become critical and skeptical. And it's just been interesting seeing the kind of Silicon Valley's own PR kind of crash and burn. And then lately I've been joking that, you know, you would think that they were seeking to make everyone hate them because they couldn't do a better job of it if they tried, between the attacks, the self-pity, the hatred, you know, the public hatred of the homeless, the Google Glass incidents, and et cetera. So it's been really interesting watching a story kind of fall apart, where the idea that we're wonderful, we're your friends, we're making your lives better. Oh, and by the way, we're sharing your data with the NSA, but actually the NSA doesn't have that much, we have 100 times more. And things like that. It's been interesting seeing that come apart. Positive stories. We could go over to positive stories.
And that's like a real myth. I mean, that's like the myth that Silicon Valley's created for itself, just the whole superstructure of it kind of crumbling.
Well, it's also interesting because one of the things that's amazing living here is seeing that the whole world is really interested in Silicon Valley. And here sometimes you're like, you think it's a neighborhood problem or a local problem. I was in Reykjavik this summer, and, everybody has an iPhone, everybody has a MacBook, everybody's uses the Google search engine, et cetera. And it's like, oh yeah, we are now the global center of power in a big way, which is not what this place used to be. But it is interesting because Silicon Valley's own genesis story is like, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in a garage, and it's all humble and alternative and Burning Man-y and counterculture, and the fact that it's actually always been part of the military-industrial complex, and it keeps coming up with new billionaires, and that it is the establishment is not the story they've been telling about themselves, but it's kind of the story that is beginning to be told about them.
So those are both sort of maybe not favorite stories, and we're gonna have a whole question and answer and open up this conversation a little bit. So what are on some stories that made you feel less angry and righteously indignant, more excited?
Damn, we can't talk about feminism either.
I think there is a positive spin to both of our stories, though, which is
Yeah.
that people are seeing them as stories rather
Yeah.
than reality. That's the part that makes me so hopeful. Is that
doesn't-
before we were told that this is reality. You work hard, you buy more stuff, you'll be happier. And just the fact that there was so much discussion about this ad, or there's fact that these stories are being seen as stories, that's the part that excites me so much. Because once we see these dominant discourses as optional stories that could be replaced with other stories rather than as the absolute truth, everything opens up. All these possibilities open up. So that's my positive story.
What's interesting is that the Cadillac ad sounds defensive, where it's kind of like, you probably think Europeans have a better life than ours. Well, they do, but I'm going to be really pugnacious about it.
Yeah, they don't have as good stuff.
Right.
Yeah, those German slackers.
That's right, exactly. Making all the other luxury cars. So I guess I'm curious, in your work, what have you guys done to try to, and have you been sort of self-conscious about trying to also either enlist the reader or enlist the kind of viewer listener deeper in the narrative? Because I mean, obviously, you can tell a story, and there's teller, and then there's sort of receiver and listener. But if we're telling stories for social change, it's a little different, right? You're actually trying to then engage the listener to go from listening to action. So, there's an alchemy to that. It's just tricky.
Yeah. For me, that really began with the work that turned into Hope in the Dark, really trying to look at the despair that broke out after the war in Iraq broke out. And the despair was based on kind of bad analysis. We didn't stop the war. That was completely accurate. I don't question that. but then people were like, we didn't achieve anything, which wasn't true. We never, and then they would go on. It was like, you know how you can talk yourself into a complete funk. It's like, we didn't do anything, we never do anything, we've never done anything, we never will do anything, we're completely powerless. And by the way, the Bush regime is going to be the 1,000-year Reich that will never end. And it lasted about 5 years, but which isn't 1,000 years. But it was interesting because there are two things that I thought were missing in a big way. One was the memory of our victories and how they got there, and how radically the world has changed. You know, I'm in my early 50s. I was born into a world in which there was no women's movement, and all these things we now have laws against, like sexual harassment and marital rape and things like that, weren't even conceptual categories in the culture. They were the law, and they weren't only not illegal. They were, you know, they were essentially endorsed. The Ivy League colleges didn't admit women. The Southern colleges didn't admit people of color. Interracial marriage was illegal, and the idea of same-sex marriage was inconceivable. And to be gay or lesbian was to be considered either mentally ill or criminal or both. And there was not even a language to talk about the environment. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring is a year younger than me. But so it felt like, you know, that they didn't remember that we had a lot of victories, and they didn't have a good sense of how change actually works, which is that it's not instantaneous and direct and your money guaranteed, you know, your instant results guaranteed or your money back, etc. That it's often protracted and complex, and something happens now and people build on it, and it's not, you know, it's not linear. And so I've been arguing these more complex senses of how things take place and how things build, and trying to remember those stories ever since.
A lot of that storytelling through memory. You sort of have to go back to the Wayback Machine.
Just reminding people, you know, it's that sort of Howard Zinn approach, which is that actually there's a lot of popular victories, actually there's a lot of popular power. And these days I also say, like, you know, maybe our enemies are the ones who really know. Like, when Occupy Wall Street happened, a lot of people, progressives and people on the left, were like, oh, we've always been ineffectual, we're still ineffectual, we're totally ineffectual. Then you went to Davos, and they were really scared. And, like, billionaires are, you know, the cranky, is it Tom Perkins who wrote the letter about Kristallnacht and et cetera to the Wall Street Journal? What was really interesting is that he thinks that people, ordinary people, are really powerful. And that's what, and you see a certain kind of fear when something like Occupy happens, where it's like, oh yeah, they think we're really powerful. Maybe we are. And so that's also something I've been interested in, is like, what's valuable in their stories? Like, I've been thinking about, there's a massive amount of attacks against outspoken women on the boys' world, that is online world, on Twitter and comment sections, etc. And I thought, like, what is this really about? And it's about women really have power, and it scares some people a lot. And it's like, then the really bottom line here isn't that there's misogyny. The bottom line is that women have power, and people are trying to take it away. So it's interesting going and looking at those negative things and seeing, like, where's our power in that too, as part of my endless storytelling project.
And Annie, what have you tried to do to sort of enlist the viewer or the listener to become more of a participant than just a receiver?
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question within the context of social change, because I'm attracted to and excited about stories because of their power to further social change. And I actually was a late comer onto the story bandwagon, because I used to believe what would get people involved is more data about the state of the planet and more information. And I thought it was more scientists that we needed, and we needed more heads. And what I realized is we need more hearts, and stories are the way to connect people in the hearts. There's a couple of ways I've used storytelling in my work. One thing is inviting people to tell their own story. Often in the United States, because of this dominant story about hard work and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and this is land of opportunity, if things are going hard, it's easy to feel like you're personally a failure, and that's reinforced a lot from the messages. And so just by creating the spaces for people to share their own stories, then, for example, in the Occupy, when people shared the stories about how much student debt they had, you know, the photographs they took with their cards, or single moms that are struggling, or people who are foreclosed, by creating and sharing the platform to highlight these stories, we see that we don't have an epidemic of personal failures. We have some structural problems. And it's only by elevating the individual stories that you can see these. So that's one of the ways that I've used storytelling to increase people's sort of structural analysis, and then find the places in the system that need changing.
And I know from talking to you individually that you guys each have a little bit, you already alluded to it really strongly, a little bit of a pet peeve that sometimes those of us who are those of us who are committed to progressive social change and social justice and ecological sustainability tell so often these self-defeating narratives. We already heard that, but how do you think this, do you also sort of share that and think there's a way to overcome it?
Oh God, I think I'm an environmentalist, so I can talk about us. We are so whiny and wonky. And no wonder why no one wants to hang out with us. Like, who would want to hang out with somebody like us who's like, there's global warming because you drove to work today, and so it's really a problem. We got to stop blaming the individuals and look for these bigger societal stories. We've got to stop focusing so much on information. This is a wonky term. I don't use that wonky terms very much anymore, but you guys can handle it. My new favorite term is non-informational barriers to change.
It's a mouthful.
Think about that. I know, but it's such a good one because the primary premise of the environmental movement for so long was if people had more information, they would change. So here's some more information. Oh, that you didn't respond? Oh, here it is in a 3D color-coded chart. Oh, here it is with more decimal points. Why is that working? Because it's not a lack of information. It's a lack of realizing that things are stories, and we could have alternative stories. It's a lack of compelling alternative stories. It's power. It's structural issues. And so I think the more that environmentalists can move from these whiny, wonky, data-led stories. I always say you should know your data and expertise, but have it on tap, not on top. Like have it in your back pocket if you get challenged, but lead with a more positive, uplifting story, and then people will start inviting us to more parties.
If I can bring it back to Earth Island Journal, we did have a really great story on this by a guy named Robert Cabin in the last issue that we called Science Friction, and Bob made the very smart point that in fact more data just becomes more alienating.
It's
when you start to, it's like the nail is flush with the board. And just banging it in more is not going to get you any further. We know we talk about myth and parable, and there's certain archetypes that are really resonant with people. They always have been, right? And sort of the hero's journey. I wonder if there's when you sort of think about some archetypes, if we're maybe telling stories that have got the wrong heroes, the wrong villains. Could we tell stories that have different protagonists to them?
I'm so glad you brought up this hero's journey, because this is another way that I use storytelling to motivate change, is that it's all about the audience, and the audience is the hero. The sort of classic hero's journey is there's a threat, and in real life we got that. There's a possible resolution. In real life we got that. There's a reluctant hero. That can be the audience. And so when I'm giving talks or interviews, I try to frame the environmental information in this hero's journey arc of threat, problem. One thing we're missing, it's you guys, it's the hero, it's you guys. Create this whole space and invitation for people to step up and be a hero. In the traditional sort of hero's journey arc, the hero gets some magic thing, ruby slippers or a lightsaber or what, some magic thing. So we can do that. Here's our online activist kit. Here's the Earth Island Journal. We got some magic things to help you, and invite the audience in to be the hero. So that's one of the ways that I've sort of redefined who the hero is it's got to be all of us, because that honestly is the one thing that we're missing.
Anything you've done in your storytelling sort of on that?
I want to be Annie Leonard when I grow up. I just feel like when I tell stories, everything gets much more entangled, and when she does it, it all gets clear. This is how you can tell us apart, that and the dimples.
Well, I want to ask you about that because, your storytelling is really complex, and I love it, but I'm wondering how you also convey the passion's clear, the passion's like crystal clear, and it's bell clear, and yet there's a lot of artistry. Do you ever feel that there's a tension between the artistry and then wanting to have the kind of just let's all get on the barricades?
There's an artistry, I think, in speaking, in truly being passionate, and it's like not being tone deaf, knowing when you're being annoying or badgering or inflicting guilt or all those other things the left is very good at doing, and the Puritan left. But I think where was I going to go with that? These questions of what motivates people. It's interesting also because I totally agree with Annie. What I was thinking about when she was talking, I went to the San Francisco Retirement Board meeting again last week. They were asked more than 10 months ago to divest the Board of Supervisors of the City of San Francisco. How many of you are San Franciscans? That would be the majority. Was the Board of Supervisors voted in a non-binding resolution to ask the Retirement Board, that's where all the money is. The city doesn't have a lot of money in fossil fuels to divest as part of the international divestment movement. And the Retirement Board has been dragging its feet. And it's interesting, they're not climate change denialists, and there's this bizarre thing where they will acknowledge the facts, but it's as though they're not really real. And I just feel like we're people saying your house is on fire, and there are people saying like you're such an alarmist, and we're like, no, the flames are right behind you, and they're like, I'm really busy, you want me to turn around? And it was interesting looking at, because it is exactly that thing where it's not exactly the facts. And climate change is complicated because it's not like rights for queer people or something like that, in that which for somebody who's like an adult in 1960, it's like you didn't have all the time in the world either, but you needed it now. But, it's so urgent. But it's interesting because they will come around, and a lot of people have, but it's like, at what speed? And I was thinking about how much we tend to think it's really knowing the facts. And I think even in our own lives that, we mostly know everything we need to, but there's those moments when you have a crisis and you really realize something. It's like we need different language for knowing something and sort of deeply, emotionally getting it and getting behind it. And the the Retirement Board probably will get there in the end. But there's these amazingly dedicated people who are super good policy wonks who can stand this whole incredible, painful process. And that's a lot of what heroism consists of, is people who can stand more bureaucracy and read more incredibly tedious forms and understand more arcane laws or even write them than I can. And just dog it. And the Retirement Board is going to be dogged until this is done. And it will probably happen. But it was interesting looking at what was missing was their sense that it's their responsibility that having a really nice, they kept saying, if somebody says fiduciary duty to me again, I'll go ballistic. And it's kind of like, do you understand that like having really nice pension returns is not going to be that good if the oceans die and there's mass famine and mass displacement and a few other things like, did I mention crop failure and a few things like that? And it's like, and it's interesting. I think that one of the hardest things for environmentalists is that the bias is that the world always has been this way, it always will be this way, which is the inability, I think particularly in this country, to imagine change and to understand that the future isn't actually going to be like the present. I think a lot of people in this country don't understand that things change. Like, I think a lot of people don't remember there were no homeless people in the United States almost. There was like a few Skid Row bombs, and that was it in 1980, that we manufactured the homeless population, which means we could unmanufacture. People don't remember that the University of California was a free public university that and there was no student debt for going to it and stuff. And it's sort of, the amnesia means that people don't remember things or change. They don't remember that they can be agents of change, and that the situation now was constructed for the advantage of some and the disadvantage of others, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
And that imagining, that's the really hard part. I've been reading recently, this is going a little bit beyond where I thought we were going to go, but I've been reading a lot recently some Ursula Le Guin, right, who's a really profound moral thinker who puts her moral thinking in the form of science fiction, right? So it's all on some other planet, but there's these parables wrapped in it. So if you're not going to go to science fiction, I'm not expecting you to do like the Ursula Le Guin of online videos tomorrow, but if we're not going to go to science fiction, how, and I know this is a $64 million question, but how do you create the new language that allows people to imagine? Do you just sort of have to project it out there?
It's so hard, because I feel like a lot of people know that the situation we're in now is not working, whether it's environmentally or socially or their health or, it's economically. In so many ways it's not working. But if we don't have a different compelling articulation, psychologists will show that people stay in a dysfunctional, unhealthy, known situation than go to a potentially better unknown situation. So that's why I think it's so important that people who are beginning to build some of a different way, the people who are beginning to articulate it. Places like Seattle has passed a resolution. It's fun. It's called the Say Hi, the Seattle Area Happiness Initiative, and they now screen the potential policies on whether or not it will increase happiness in the city, like Bhutan has done. I mean, there's different pieces like that, policy-wise. People who are actually putting together permaculture systems or putting in clean energy pieces of it that are starting to be actually built. I think it's important that we make those more visible to start to give people a sense of the possibility that's out there. Otherwise, we're just stuck. Have you ever heard the saying that some people are in a rut so deep they think it's a groove? I feel like that's where we are as a society, and we gotta get out and realize there's a better way. And it's hard with no language. You know, when I am giving public talks, often people say, "Are you for communism? Are you for socialism? Are you for green capitalism?" And I would say, you know, I'm for a system that respects all people. I'm for a system that doesn't sacrifice health for short-term profit. I mentioned the qualities of the system, and people are like, well, what's it called? What's it called? I said, I don't know, we're still inventing it. And you want to help? And I would say, what's your name, Joe? It can be called Joeism for all I care. Just come on and come help. But we need to figure out how to better spotlight, highlight those pieces of a solution and put them together into a cohesive, super inviting narrative. Because then we won't have to badger people to come over. It'll just be so much better over there. It'll be obvious.
What she said.
What she said.
Yeah, no, it's you know, and the story is changing and has changed, and it's interesting. Like before the Wall Street collapse, people were so loath to criticize Wall Street and bankers, etc. And we just had this amazing nationwide movement that's not it's like morphed and isn't so visible, but Occupy Wall Street isn't over. And the fact that in probably the majority of cities and towns in the country there were Occupy Wall Street contingents was a level of fury at the status quo of capitalism as practiced in the US and at the Wall Street bankers that was unimaginable. Because that's also what I feel is like amazing things happen. The world has changed so much, and it's partly that because, you know, most of the people who, like the New York Times, you know, like Jesus could come back and give all of you a psychedelic pony, and the New York Times would find a way to cover it that would make it really boring, you know.
If they covered it.
I don't think it's going to happen, but if it did, it would be like you know, Sources Tuesday said that a bearded figure walked across water with what zoologists have been unable to identify, but you know, it's just, and it's interesting because people don't look at these things and say this is completely amazing, and you know, and it's like we're facing a lot of really dire stuff, but it is really amazing, and that, you know, like, and it's partly that when you say that, people think, you know, because the U.S. Maybe it's a two-party system, maybe it's the Puritan hangover, I'm not sure what it is, but people like to tell if it's not black, it's white, if it's not good, if it's evil, if it's not a victory, it's a defeat, and it's so much more complex. If you say things are totally amazing, people think that I'm saying, oh, we've won and now we can rest on our laurels, and they think the opposite of that is they have to say, everything's terrible and we lost. And it's actually like, you know, there's some interesting gray area where we've like made a lot, like if you talk about feminism where amazing things have happened, we're addressing 5,000 or so years of patriarchy, and we've made some major inroads. And anybody who thought we're going to like completely fix everything magically with psychedelic ponies in 50 years, you know, is short-sighted. And you know, where you don't, and that's that middle ground. I think we don't have a lot of language for where you're not complacent and satisfied, and you're not bitter and disappointed, where you feel motivated and inspired by what people have done before you, and want to carry it forward and think you might get somewhere with some of it. And also recognize that you don't know what's going to happen, because the pessimism, which I spend so much time around in the American left, actually kind of believes that it knows what's going to happen, and actually you don't. And often things turn out completely differently. And like if you say like things are going to get better and they don't, everybody wants to like stone you to death. But people run around all the time talking about how terrible things are going to be, and they come out other than terrible, and like they never have to apologize for it. And you know, we sort of accept that dismal narrative. You know, it's kind of an invisible part of the ecosystem, but it's invisible like mercury is invisible, or you know, toxic emissions are invisible or something.
I mean, a lot of this gets into sort of and this is really tricky, but as a storyteller, sort of the middle way. I mean, the middle way between not having that sort of bloodless language of the daily newspapers, and yet not wanting to have the sort of Cassandra-like, screed that is going to turn people off. I mean, that's a real tightrope to walk.
I looked up the myth of Cassandra the other day.
Did I get it totally wrong?
No, you got it. No, it was actually really shocking. So I'm looking at why, when women say uncomfortable things, people say that they're pathological liars, unbelievable, vindictive, etc. And Cassandra, the god Apollo wanted to sleep with Cassandra, and she turned him down. So she had the gift of prophecy, but he made it so no one would ever believe her.
She was correct.
Well, the thing is, she always prophesied correctly. Nobody ever believed her, and it just made me think of, Anita Hill and
And that part of the story doesn't get out as much. That's
it was
interesting.
really interesting, but we're here to talk about. Well, it's part of the story.
Or even a Rachel Carson, which most of the world, many people listen
yeah.
to, but still sort of the dominant,
Actually,
culture sort of would look the other way.
The Time review of Silent Spring, where Time talks about Miss Carson's histrionics about perfectly safe DDT, is really amazing, and the level of open sort of sexism.
Yeah,
And
that she's
patronization.
hysterical.
She's emotional and overwrought, and they just talk with total confidence about how DDT is awesome and poses no problem whatsoever, and she's a hysterical, overwrought lady, but she won.
Right.
And
Well, I get a lot of emails like that. I don't know if you do, but for a while when Glenn Beck was attacking the story of stuff, we got emails all the time about how what a hysterical communist lesbian lady, like the insane stuff that people would write to me. I said, all I'm saying is we're using too much stuff. I'm not sure why that's such a trigger.
the problem wasn't what you're saying. The problem was that you were saying, and I think that the trolls.
The problem that I was.
Yeah, this may be the Anthropocene, but it's also the age of trolls.
Right, for sure. So why is it a trigger?
It's so interesting. I think it's a trigger because people know it, that we're using too much stuff, and that so many of our myths are based on it. From the myths on how we demonstrate our self-worth, how we value each other, to the myths of how we keep our economy running. So actually, when I made the Story of Stuff film, I thought I was making it to tell people where stuff came from and where it goes. I didn't even realize that I was fundamentally critiquing the core myths and the core economic system of this country. And I remember I showed it to somebody early on, and he said, everyone's going to say you're an anti-capitalist. I said, no, they aren't. I'm just telling you where all our stuff comes from and where it goes. And everyone tells them, I'm an anti-capitalist. And so I realized that by speaking the truth about our relationship to stuff, you're not just telling the stories of what, I spent 20 years traveling around the world looking at factories where stuff is made and dumped where stuff is dumped. I thought I was just telling you what I saw. I was actually really putting a stake into the heart of some of our fundamental stories that are incredibly flawed, that are also incredibly taboo to question. I didn't realize that. I found
Like
out quickly.
shoes. I watched it again last night, and it was really funny seeing. How many of you have seen the story of Stuff? Good.
More people who live in
Good.
San Francisco.
Yeah, well, there are definitely not 40 million people in San
Right,
Francisco.
right.
Last I checked, although maybe next year. But no, it's really interesting looking because you're really, you're getting at much bigger things. As well as just the kind of production consumption, but the psychology and the emotional investment and stuff, and
It's all
the
connected.
simplicity of that critique of now shoes have pointy heels and now they have flat, now they have chunky heels, and you have last year's shoes and you're not with it. But the way you put it, it was sort of amazing, and just looking at the way that we all get caught up in it.
Yeah, it's true.
So I would love to hear, I know I don't have any of the answers, I don't even have all the questions. I know you guys got a lot of questions, and there's a lot of really sharp minds in the room, so I'd love to open it up to have more of a discussion here. So anybody else have any?
We better be good.
Oh yeah, if you could introduce yourselves and just say your name and maybe how you came here tonight.
My name is Samantha Sanderson, and Marty Krasny is my stepfather, and Pamela is my mom, and that's how I'm here. And I'm so excited to be here. And so I haven't seen the whole film. I saw an intro, and I immediately began thinking about my own stuff and my own relation to stuff. And it's addictive. There's also that quality where it's like pushing the bar to get the pellet. It's like, and I think that's part of what might be really hard to break through is it's often hard to look at your own addictions in a really clear way and to be like, do I really need a new pair of shoes with a pointy heel or a pointy toe, whatever. But it did immediately get me thinking about the things I'm thinking about buying already. I've got a list of things, and do I really need them or not? But that part of it, I don't know if that's in the rest of the film. But just the act itself, it does make you feel good for a brief moment. You get this rush of pleasure, and that's hard to let go of.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is that rush of pleasure, it's like shooting up, because then you have to go back the next day or the next week. Like it's relentless and it's exhausting, and there's a huge planetary toll and economic toll, and it's just not that fun after a while to be like a junkie. And so one of the things that we work with the people who come to us after the Story of Stuff, we were flooded with emails after the film came out, is we work with them to do other things that can also provide thrills of satisfaction, like engage in civic and social issues. And if you look at the real happiness, the science of happiness, and you look at what really contributes the most to happiness, it's not a new pair of boots, even if it's a really cool pair, or a new iPhone, or a new car, even if it's a Prius or a Leaf or whatever. It's really consistent what most makes people happy across income groups and ethnicities and age groups, once your basic needs are met. I mean, if you don't have food and a roof, more stuff does make you happy. But once your basic needs are met, the things that most contribute to happiness are your social fabric, friends and family, your community, having a sense of purpose and meaning beyond yourself, and the act of coming together with others towards shared goals. And so what's really cool about that is that working together to make a better future provides all those things that most make us happy. So if we can change the story about what it means to work together for a better future from this like self-righteous eco-martyr, wear sandals all year round and eat cardboard tasting veggie burgers, and if we can change it from that to come over here and we can actually build the power to turn this country around and have more fun in the process, why would you not want to do that? So that's one of the things that we work on to help sort of overcome that addiction, is fill that void with something that actually makes you happy and helps the world at the same time.
It was interesting when I did all that work on disasters, finding that those moments when people came together, even when their city had been destroyed, even when everything had been upended, etc., there was this incredible joy in accounts of the 1906 earthquake and a lot of the Mexico City earthquake, the Blitz in London, and a lot of other disasters. And that joy was so intense, and it was really interesting. It's really partly a language problem. What we can't name, we can't claim and value. And people would have these amazing experiences, even in 9/11 and things, and then because nobody said this is really what life should be like, this is what life should be, 99% of them went back to their ordinary lives, and then 1% were able to find, so might say, this is who I want to be, this is what life is really for, and go make that happen. And I think, yesterday was Mardi Gras. Sadly, well, of course, because we're environmentalists, we're here on Ash Wednesday now. New Orleans, they make that joy all the time. It's a really interesting place where, people celebrate and really know deeply that community. What?
It's always Fat Tuesday.
It's Ash Wednesday, even New Orleans in a big way today, and. But you'd hate the fact that you measure how successful a parade is by how many tons of garbage they sweep up after with the throws.
There's all these dang plastic beads.
I know. But I was going to say, but it's interesting because I feel like part of our job is to formulate a sort of an alternative system of value for people to have language to value those experiences and pleasures and things, and because it's not there and nobody's marketing it to you. It's like everybody markets cars to you, nobody markets walking.
Yeah. I call it a soul-feeding joy. The happiness you get from working together with others and having strong social lives, it is a soul-feeding joy. And you might get a thrill from a new jacket, but it's not a soul-feeding joy. There's a qualitative difference. And once you've had that soul-feeding joy, oh man, it tastes so good. You just want more.
Now you had a question?
Yeah, I love this conversation, thank you. But I was struck thinking about talking about how there is this sort of amnesia. We don't have very long-term memories, and there's constantly this need for black and white and no gray. And it made me wonder if there isn't a story about the formula of stories, that it has to have one hero, and there has to be an outcome and a moral, and this very tangible and clear black and white path, and I'm curious sort of how you grapple with that, especially Annie for you, because I imagine that you have to chunk things down into pieces all the time, and also how online storytelling is sort of, now we're barraged with stories, and every story has to be shorter than the next story, and there are more and more of them, and I'm wondering how you guys grapple with that in order to bring something that is more complex and talks about collective power, not just one hero and those sorts of things.
I talk really, really fast to fit a line.
That's what I do.
It's like shrinking the font and the margin on your application.
I have to think about that one.
She kind of answered it, saying she tries to tell people that the audience is the hero. And it's interesting because we do have a culture that likes rugged individualist heroes, often male, and you see a lot of stuff mistold as Rosa Parks, the individual who sat down on the bus, rather than Rosa Parks, the person representing the NAACP and other groups who decided. And you see that with everything. And those weird things where Saddam Hussein becomes a shorthand for Iraq, Bill McKibben becomes a shorthand for the climate movement, and things like that. And it's hard. We like, I sometimes think we're village-scaled people. We relate well to individual and personal and particular stories, which might be why Miley Cyrus got more coverage in the International Panel on Climate Change's report that was released simultaneously to her performance in, was it beginning of October, end of October? So, and it feels like we're sort of badly tooled for being the global species that have to deal with all this wonky stuff we are. But there's stories lurking in there, and Annie can find them.
Or in 2012, Kim Kardashian got 50 times more coverage than ocean acidification.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So she's responsible.
She's the one. Right? Kim Kardashian's the one.
Yeah. Ouch. And of course, it's also about, what it's part of the whole machine of like Kim Kardashian's stories go much better with advertisements than ocean acidification stories, etc. It's interesting looking at how much the internet is based on advertising as it currently exists, and all the exciting ways it could fall apart. If the ad base gets undermined, which is easier to do. You can't really clip all the ads out of your newspaper, but you can block them all on your computer. And whether, some of those things could start tweaking that, and all the nonprofits, the online nonprofits like ProPublica that are now trying to provide alternative narratives.
Right.
What she said.
What she said. Yeah, Lindy.
My name is Lindy, and I came with my sister Dory, and we walk every day in Golden Gate Park. And the thing is, every day is a storytelling thing, and it's we meet all kinds of people every single day, and we talk about this old tree, the bees are over there. Did you see the ravens? Did you see the ravens over here? But did you know they're related to the ravens over there? I mean, and the thing is that what I find, I've been doing this for a while since I got dogs about 15 years ago, walking, so it reminds me of you with your walking, the thing is that really, you end up talking to the kids on the street, you end up talking to everybody, and everybody begins to love all the nature that's around them. They never maybe noticed this tree, but 3 people are standing talking about this tree and how incredible this tree is. Oh my God, that is incredible. And so I really think the stories have to be about the nature that is here in San Francisco. And the cool thing that I've noticed about all this influx of young kids that have come is they like to be outdoors. Everybody loves to be in the parks. They like to go to the beach. They like to be outside. And that's where all our beautiful things are. That's where, all of a sudden one day you're climbing up over a hill and you see this like bougainvillea that's like 500 years old or something. It's just incredible. And then if people talk about it and go, wow, did you ever notice that? I've never seen that before. Oh my God, it has to be really old. And then you talk about it. And to me, that's the component of people sharing together and telling stories about place. We love our place. We love San Francisco. The people that walk San Francisco love it. And everybody has a dog now. When I first arrived, everyone had cats.
That is major progress.
You know, and the cats were all over the place. They weren't kept in. Now they tell them you got to keep your cats inside because they get diseases or whatever. So you don't see cats anymore, but everybody has a dog. But the great thing about it is people say, oh, you get a dog, you have to walk that dog. You know, we tell stories to each other. Oh, no, you can't just like leave the dog all day. If you have to, then you have to have a dog walker. So that means there's all these people out, everybody's walking, everybody's talking about, you know, how beautiful it is. Oh my God, did you see the clouds today? Did you see? And I think that's how San Francisco is going to start saving the planet, because everybody's going to love it so much from doing it every day, and running into each other and their neighbors and talking. We want to keep this, you know, keep the stuff we love. And before we forgot about it, we ignored it. We didn't even notice the old trees because nobody was out walking. Now everyone's out.
This kind of gets into the idea of the agora, right? Like the public space. We just need some public spaces, unstructured public spaces that aren't mediated, where we can bump into each other and have serendipitous conversations.
The lady that watches, you know, the birds over on Stowe Lake, she knows where the baby owls are. And then, you know, there's the raven lady by the ball field in Big Wreck. And, you know, I talk to her, and then I tell Dory, and then Dory tells somebody else. And next thing you know, we're all watching the old lady that's into the ravens, and then she tells us, well, you know, the ravens in the arboretum are the offspring of these ravens. I've been feeding these ravens for 20 years, and they're also over there in the fuchsia dell. And next thing you know, she can't walk with me without me telling about every single raven we've seen. And we've seen a lot of ravens. I mean, isn't that nuts? You know what I mean? So it ties in your like walking and that whole thing, and the environmentals thing, and telling stories with each other and appreciating what we have. We have something really, really incredible here.
Okay, Andy, the story of walks coming soon.
I think what's so incredible about that is not just reconnecting with nature, which we can't love something we don't know, so that part is great, but reconnecting with each other, because we've got to put our screens down and talk to each other again, so that we can build this social fabric, both to provide happiness and meaning, and also because as we move into more resource-depleted era, we need community, and we need to know each other. And when you're in the middle of baking a cake and you're short one egg, if you don't know your neighbors, you can't ask them for it. You've got to drive. So building community is so incredibly core to both for having meaningful, happy lives and also for survival, ecological survival.
It is one of the funny things being that that Silicon Valley really wants to live in San Francisco, but its ideal that it's always creating is like, pretty soon you'll just be able to get somebody on TaskRabbit to deliver the egg to you, and you'll never have to leave your house. You know, there's been this rhetoric for 20 years that we're going to create all these great online things, so you never have to leave the house or talk to strangers again. And then what do they want to do with all the money they're making? Move to San Francisco and leave the house and talk to strangers.
And part of this, and part of this, well, the antidote. I mean, you know, in the last issue of Earth Island Journal, we had a conversation with Michael Pollan, and we were kind of exploring the idea of the resurgent sort of craft ideal. I mean, sometimes it's easy to sort of make light of, right? You know, all these hipsters like making their own pants or whatever. But there is something there, right? There is this hunger for tangible goods, and this craft revival is in some ways kind of the other side of the disembodied internet, right? I mean, people are hungry to know their food or to know their clothing or to, all these sorts of things.
You know, somebody was telling me the other day, what was it, Goldman Sachs doesn't care if you have chickens. But at the same time, I do think that these are the last.
That is true.
You know, meaning that it's not necessarily a way. And I worry about it. I did a whole piece for Orion a while back called, what was it called? But it was
Revolutionary Plots. Well, there's a photo of me in the story. You may recall.
It's all ingrown, really.
Yeah, it's all very tight up here on the day.
All the bad things they told you are true. But it is, you know, but I do, you know, those things can be so radical where people just want a sweater that wasn't made by alienated sweatshop labor and exploit, you know, that there wasn't exploitation and alienation every step of the way. And it models for them what else it could be. And sometimes and it's funny because it exists on a spectrum. There's some completely radical models that are teaching models and scalable models and doing amazing things. And then there's just the boutique stuff like Twitter bought 2 log cabins, which they're going to deconstruct and reconstruct as their lunchrooms in their Twitter facilities. Yeah, and that's just kind of the aesthetique to authenticity that doesn't actually, you know, doesn't actually have anything to do with anything. Would be the short version. But we should, yeah.
Anna, you had a question? Or
My name is Anna LePay, and I'm a big fan of Earth Island Journal and both the ladies on the stage. And we've sort of talked about this a little bit, but one of the questions that I have, thinking about both of you and thinking about the platforms from which you tell stories, so Rebecca mainly books, and I know Anna, you wrote a book, but also these online videos, is thinking about the where of storytelling and how that is or isn't changing, and Jason thinking about the magazine as a where. But knowing, like Annie, thinking about your online platform and how you've already seen that shifting and changing since you first came out with the video, and how Facebook is starting to do things to put a stranglehold on how much you can communicate openly to your audience, and thinking about the consolidation of the book publishing industry and how that affects you as a book author. So just wondering how you both have thought about the where if we tell these stories. Are there new places where we'll be telling these stories? Do you feel like there's places that are particularly powerful that you've discovered? But just, I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Silicon Valley, but the internet has all sorts of other spaces like that. Annie's got essentially her own. Well, I guess it's a website, but is it a YouTube channel as well?
You got that too.
And things like that. That there has, where there used to be a few stories, there's now room for thousands of stories, and some of them are white supremacist and crazy conspiracy theories and stuff, but there's also room for a lot of radical stuff out there. And so actually the book publishing industry is kind of leveled out, and I'm not sure there was ever a golden age of publishing, and there were other problems at other points. So and I always say, look, if it's going to be the Dark Ages, I'll be an Irish monk. But it's not going to be. It's not going to be it's not going to be the Dark Ages, I think. So, you know what? And there's lots of things I could talk about that I worry about. But I also see a lot of strength in the way people have to communicate. Although it's interesting, the movements that are exciting for me, like Occupy, like the 1999 launched anti-globalization movement, etc., rest a lot on digital media, but there's no substitute for bodies in public spaces. And as long as people don't forget that, that's really, and I think part of what happened with Occupy is that young people whose lives are so mediated, kind of had the shock of joy of coexistence and solidarity in space, in physical embodied space together, that was really galvanizing and maybe strange for them in a way it might not have been for people who grew up in a more embodied era. So
I like the storytelling in person personally best, because you can meet and connect and really bond, but there's only so many places one can be. And so I've just become a huge fan of what we can do with the internet. I mean, the Story of Stuff film has been seen over 30 million times. All our films 40 million times. I can actually go to Google Analytics and see a map of the world and see a dot everywhere someone has watched it. It is now every country in the world. For a long time, Central African Republic was the only one without it, so I was going to just randomly mail DVDs there. But now it's every country. I mean, there's no way I could have reached that. I get emails every day from people in India and Brazil and Russia. It's fascinating. And I think that the internet has allowed a democratization and decentralization of storytelling. We've moved away from this broadcast era. The way that these more detrimental stories got so dominant was it was the broadcast era, which the way you got your stories out was by paying. Whether it was crappy stories or not, if you paid the bill, the commercial went on the television. With the internet, it's moved to what Jonas Sachs calls the digitoral age. Prior to the broadcast age, the stories that survived were done orally. They were the stories that were good enough that people, the oral transition, people kept them alive and added to them and changed them over time. That was like the oral tradition. Then the broadcast era, and now what we have is what Jonah calls the digitoral era, is that the stories that stay alive are the ones that you want to share and you can add to also. I mean, people often congratulate me for making a viral film. I said, I didn't make a viral film. I made a film. You guys made a viral. One person cannot make a viral film. They make the film. The community makes it viral. And so the stories that have that community traction are the ones that can reach 30 or 40 million people without big bucks to pay for the advertisements. That's why I am so concerned about net neutrality. I mean, I remember when I was first starting to use the internet, there was not ads everywhere. I mean, the other day I just had to look at the price of something on Amazon for an article I was writing, and I'm getting freaking ads for that thing all the
Ad
time.
block.
Yeah, it's, pardon?
Ad block.
I don't gotta do that. Although I'm sort of interested in what's happening, because I like to see what's happening. But it's, we really, really, really have to fight for net neutrality to make sure that the net serves us and our community rather than corporate interests. I mean, if we want to see democracy continue to thrive or come back, we've got to have a neutral net. I think that's one of the biggest battles ahead of us if we want to allow the space for the best stories to survive.
Nadine?
Yes. Hello, I'm Nadine. I'm a huge fan of Earth Island Journal. And you got me thinking, if Kim Kardashian had 50 million more views than ocean acidification, then how can we create an eco-conscious Kim Kardashian? I mean, it's like if you can't beat them, join them. It's like, okay, let's create the green Kim Kardashian who becomes the aspirational lifestyle, except it's a sustainable or it's a regenerative lifestyle.
Philippe Cousteau is trying really hard.
Is
Really
he?
out there trying. God bless him. Glad he's doing his hard work.
And when Leonardo DiCaprio drove
yeah.
a Prius to the Oscars,
yeah.
the sales plummeted. It's not plummeted, it's
Whoa, hey, wait a minute, it's the wrong narrative.
wrong one.
Wrong narrative.
Sales exploded.
But that's a really important question, is how do you take a little bit, I mean, this is the whole thing, how do you, can you sort of use the master's tools to disassemble the master's house? Can you sort of surf all of this pop culture energy in some way to tell really powerful progressive stories that will reach a wider audience?
I think it's there's some low-hanging fruit that's accessible, but at some point there's some fundamental conflicts, because the very system that enriches Kim Kardashian, the economic system, the advertising system, the stories that upon which she rides are those very stories and very systems that are threatening the planet. So unless she's going to have a really deep fundamental revelation, we can only go so far with Kim.
And I mean, I think, I do think, on that tension around, what is the business model of most traditional media? This is why I think, as you mentioned earlier, ProPublica is so important. Is, how do we maybe just need to go, especially with the dailies or the weeklies, to a model that's a kind of what we're doing at Earth Island Journal, but a nonprofit funded model where you essentially have 21st Century Medicis who are saying, we're gonna fund this work. We think it's really important. The Center for Media and Democracy, that kind of work where we're just saying, we know that democracy, that information is a public good and a democratic good, and there's just going to have to be some people out there who pay for it, and it's going to be ad free. That's why I think something like ProPublica is really exciting. It just is kind of it's a workaround.
It's scary though, because it's part of the new landscape that's more and more and more unequal, where a few billionaires get to decide
Right.
things. Like Jeff Bezos, apparently 10% of all commerce in the U.S. now goes through Amazon. And Jeff Bezos just bought the Washington Post a little while back, and you just get these these people who are so insanely powerful. And like the guy who just started what's the name of the new one that Glenn Greenwald and
Madar, who funded that? Somebody knows. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds really great, and it has great people there, but at this, like Jeremy Scahill's also there, but at the same time, it's like, depends on the whim of a weird tech billionaire. So, and there were problems with the Medici era.
Sure.
And I'm
Yes,
not
yes, Didn't they fund Machiavelli? Right.
Yeah. Well, there were the Medicis for starters. But and then there were the popes. But so I think there's a lot of interesting things happening, but that's one of the scarier parts of the media, is that our really great new progressive investigative journalism project's going to depend on billionaires, and what happens if they want to investigate things that compromise those particular billionaires, or the system that produces billionaires, or et cetera.
You saw it happen in PBS with the Crotch Brothers. It's
Yeah.
a perfect example. But I'd like to put a warning out too, because we were talking earlier about how do you reach more people. And part of the crisis of reaching more people is becoming more centralized. And I fear that becoming more centralized gave us episodic television, it gave us the networks, and the stories that were told were not personal stories, and they transcended a narrative and almost became propaganda. And I think that these salons and smaller areas where people are talking eyeball to eyeball are much more important. And Annie, I'm with you. I vastly fear for the internet. I mean, I can't get anything. I mean, if I do a Google search, all I get is advertising. It's pretty much useless. And I don't have the money to afford, and I'm pretty well off, a LexisNexis account, which I would love to have, or a Westlaw account. But I think that I think that we really need to be very careful, and particularly in storytelling, because, you know, I so love to go to StoryCorps because they're such personal stories, and I identify, or sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get angry, but it's not the machine telling me a story, and it's not a personal story being told through the eyes of an MSNBC or a Fox person who are, you know, goofballs. I mean, it's a real story, and it's the stories that we know from our friends and our families.
Yes, Brett.
So many environmentalists are, as you mentioned, whiny, wonky, humorless, data-driven, and fail to capture the human spirit and affect the kind of change that we'd like to make. So, can you think of some examples of people who have told the story and been successful, maybe with the data on tap but not on top?
I think a lot of young people have. I think a lot of young people understand the science, but around the country there's this whole movement, like you just saw it in front of the White House on Sunday. 400 college students got arrested in front of the White House protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. And I was listening to their interviews. They're so passionate. They weren't talking about parts per million. They were talking about their futures. And they had farmers there that were being interviewed, and they weren't talking about, you know, carbon sequestration and endocrine disrupting chemicals, and they were talking about their land and their relationship to the land. And so I think there's a blossoming movement of people that are figuring out that data alone isn't going to work. It's about connecting and building a movement, and you need to bring your heart to the relationship, not just a data set. But especially with young people, but also about the dreamers, the immigrants that were going across the country in the bus with the Dreamer bus. Their stories were so powerful and so moving. So I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of people tired of the data sets and trying to figure out other ways to connect with folks.
I take it everyone here identifies as kind of a whiny, wonky, and I thought so, actually. I just testing. But we were talking about Rachel Carson, and that's sort of a founding mother of modern environmentalism, who was a great storyteller. And we're in the city where John Muir co-founded the Sierra Club, and he was a fantastic storyteller. That there are a lot of people who tell those stories really well. And Cesar Chavez and the farm workers got people to understand and make visible. And there's been a lot of groups and individuals, I think, who've actually been, and there's sort of a default setting, which is like, now I will make you feel really bad while I drone on with my hideous data.
I think it's the professional environmentalists that are the worst. Right?
Yeah, but there's been, the Julia Butterfly Hill, who sat in her tree on and off for a couple of years, and there's been, who is incredibly charismatic. There's been, and a wonderful speaker with a wonderful kind of Southern preacher background gift. And there's been just a lot of really, Van Jones, who's more rhetorically awesome than Van Jones? And he's doing amazing things along with the Reverend, what is his name, who keeps... Yeah, and some of the I don't know more people who are standing up around climate. I think we have amazing storytellers in the environmental movement. and that we kind of always have. And there's also been a lot of the nature writers, the Barry Lopez's and people like that. So, and of course not everybody's going to be Barry Lopez or Van Jones, but we have them and a lot of others. So.
I mean, the takeaway for me on that is really gets back to passion and if you can use the word, it gets back to love. I mean, I think I saw an amazing infographic today. If you look in the last 10 years, the public opinion polling on public support for gay marriage has literally gone 180 degrees. It used to be 60-40 against, and now it's 60-40 in favor in 10 years exactly. And that's a movement about love, right? It's a movement about you should love and can love whoever you want to, in the state and society is going to recognize that. And you then mentioned John Muir and Barry Lopez, right? It's like, what's so powerful about some of the iconic old dead white guys of environmentalism is that
Barry's
in
not
general,
dead.
Barry's not dead, right? I'm sorry, I saw Barry's still alive. But you think about the John Muirs or the Ed Abbeys, and it's 2 parts passion and 1 part head. It's a lot, and they bring the heads in there, but I mean, it's so much love and passion. And I think, thinking about environmental storytelling, it's the bloodless language of parts per million just ends up turning people off,
And also photography.
and also photography, for sure.
Yeah, that it's been a lot of the work since the 19th century of environmentalism has been done by photographs, not by words, and I think that still continues.
Yeah.
Whether it's actually seeing videotapes or photographs of the tar sands or the latest oil spill,
Right.
or the Richmond refinery venting last summer, or
Right.
The sort of creation of nature photography by the Sierra Club and David Brower in the 60s as a genre distinct from landscape photography. So, those are stories that don't even need words. They go straight to people's psyches.
I'm constantly I'm horrified really by, we put together what we considered stellar events with luminaries, and on any given day, the latest Hollywood violent, senseless blockbuster will, do thousands of times, pull thousands of times the audience. They, whoever they is, seem to have a formula that they can actually bank on, millions of dollars. And they know that people will go like sheep to be entertained with story and leave with nothing. There must be something in that we can use. There was a comment about Kim Kardashian. I agree that's not the right character to focus on, but there must be a character, a formula, a story that we can use that of Mr. Green, whatever, the green hero, and make it hip, cool, and sexy, as Julia Butterfly would say, and use that for sustainability. And Michael and I are wanting to explore that in a theatrical context, because I'm tired of spending my own money, struggling against those kind of odds year after year, losing money. I'm willing to continue to do that, but if there's a better way, using pure entertainment but for good purpose, then I want to explore that. And I'm curious as to, what do you think about it? Is there a formula that's being used by them and not by us that we should be using to be more successful?
I think that the reason those violent, gory blockbusters are such successes is so multifaceted. I mean, I think one thing is that life is hard for most people in this country, and to go someplace for 2 hours and zone out provides some kind of relief, which I think has no reflection of the merit of that film. But it's hard. It's hard. This is a hard country, and people are tired, and we work longer hours than people in any other industrialized country. We have less vacation than any other industrialized country. We are exhausted. We are stressed out.
Cadillac commercial.
And they did one that already says this. So I think that there's psychological issues, there's structural issues. I'm sure that the people who they have all kinds of psychologists. I don't know the movie making business, but I know the commercial businesses. The ads that market to kids, they use the best psychological expertise. They have so much thought and science that has gone into that marketing. I think that we can learn from some of that, and I think some of it we don't want. I think they really rely on what's called inadequacy marketing, like to make people feel insecure or unhappy if they don't have this mouthwash or this car or this whatever. And I don't think we want to use those dark arts of inadequacy marketing. I think we want the other thing. I think we want adequacy marketing. I think we want to appeal to people's higher sense rather than their insecurities and fears. So I absolutely agree that they know what they're doing. And some of it we want to learn from, and some of it we should just wholeheartedly reject.
Yeah.
2 words, Hunger Games,
Yeah, that's true.
which I love. Hunger Games,
Yeah.
which I loved, which was a powerful female lead against a really sinister 1% oligarchy, and with a lot of some environmental background of devastated landscape and coal miners and things like that. And I think there's a lot of room for using, and I love blockbusters. I love Hong Kong action movies, and I love the Hunger Games and things.
Avatar could be another one.
I was gonna say-
Avatar,
Yes,
where the
I know.
parable's very
Well,
clear.
from our recent experience at the Institute, pointing to meeting people where they are and the visual storytelling, the beneficiary of having the Cove, for example, which, we've worked on this issue for many years, but really meeting people where they were with this sort of action-adventure thriller formula really broke open our sort of social change aspect of leveraging that film into advocacy, building our list and building awareness around this issue. And more recently, I think we're on the tipping point with the film The Blackfish, which maybe not comparatively the same kind of level of film, but it's meeting people where they are. It was shown on CNN. It's easy to turn on that tube and have the distribution, and 50 million people have seen that film, and SeaWorld is quaking now. And Earth Island, as an institute for our International Marine Mammal Project, have been able to leverage that. So, partnering, finding people where they are and sort of doing that, make it easy for them, tell that compelling story with storytellers like yourselves, and then, the social activism components where sort of we come in. So that's, just 2 recent examples from our
Well, I really want to thank our development director, Kevin Colley, for that perfect handoff. That couldn't have been more better timed. I really, really want to thank all of you guys for being the heroes and heroines and coming out on what could be a wet walk or bike ride or drive home this evening. Really want to thank Annie and Rebecca for taking the time. This is a fundraiser, this is what we're doing all the time at Earth Island Journal, is trying to crack open just a little bit more this alchemy of storytelling for social change. And sure, in our own little small way from a small office in Berkeley, California, but also I'd like to think having a ripple effect that goes a little wider through content partnerships with people like Salon.com, with the 3rd most popular English language news source on the planet, The Guardian, which routinely picks up our content and sends it around. I think we had 35 stories last year reposted by Salon, stories reposted by Annie Reader, mentions in Politico, mentions in National Geographic, and telling these stories that are hopefully getting more people to think about what it's going to take for us to balance our own needs and our wants that feel so insatiable with the interests of all the other earthlings that we share this planet with, whether they're people or some other critters. I know that you all already made a gift and a donation to come here tonight. I hope you can make another one. If you can give more, you can see Ellen Manchester right there, or Kevin Connolly. You can always go to earthislandjournal.org and make a tax-deductible donation. We'd really appreciate it. When I say we, let me just point out who else is not. It's not just me in the little office. There's Maureen Nandanimitra. Maureen, you want to stand up? Maureen's our managing editor. Matthew Karlstrom back there is our web wrangler. You guys remember the old New Yorker cartoon on the internet? No one can tell you're a dog when you're on the internet. No one can tell you're long hair. You can just push ones and zeros around. We've got our bartender, Jacob Shea, is one of our interns. And Zoe Loftus-Farron is another one of our interns there. And it's really this small team with about 200 freelancers around the world, freelance writers, photographers, illustrators, who make the whole thing run, put out 4 physical issues of this magazine a year, along with, what was it last time, Maureen? I think about 250 original stories online. That's one original story every day, Monday through Friday, which is a grind with our small staff. But again, we're able to pay these freelancers, and we do it really lean and mean. For $1,000, we can produce a story like our summer story, which looked into how governments or government agencies and corporations are teaming up to spy on, essentially to surveil the activities of environmental activists. That cost us $1,000 to produce. Got picked up then by The Nation, got picked up by e-Reader, got picked up by Salon and The Guardian, and was viewed by, tens, hundreds of thousands more people around the world. And that cost us $1,000 to produce. And I wish we could pay our wonderful reporters more, but that's the reality of the thing. But if you make a gift tonight, we can't pay them more. So please see Ellen, see Kevin on your way out the door, see Karen back there, Karen Gosling also in our fundraising department. And thank you all for coming. You guys can continue the conversation. I think John and Michael will be patient with us if we hang out for a little while longer. And so again, thank you so much for coming. Have some more drinks. Jacob's back there pouring the wine and beer. So thank you guys. Really appreciate it.